The 1% rule that changed my future forever. Most people believe that changing your life requires making massive changes. They imagine waking up one day with endless motivation, completely transforming their habits, and becoming a brand new person overnight. They believe success begins with one dramatic decision. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the biggest transformations in life don't happen all at once? What if your future isn't built by giant leaps, but by tiny improvements that are almost impossible to notice from one day to the next? This idea is called the 1% rule, and although it sounds incredibly simple, it has the power to completely change the direction of your life. Think about how most people approach their goals. When they decide to get healthier, they try to exercise every day for 2 hours. When they decide to save money, they promise never to spend unnecessarily again. When they want to become productive, they create unrealistic schedules filled from morning until night. For a few days, everything feels exciting. They feel motivated. They believe this time will be different. But then reality arrives. The workouts become exhausting. The schedule becomes overwhelming. The sacrifices become difficult. Slowly, motivation disappears. Within weeks, everything goes back to normal. Not because they lacked potential, but because they tried to change too much, too quickly. The human brain doesn't like sudden change. It prefers familiarity. Every large change feels like a threat. That's why dramatic transformations often fail. But tiny improvements are different. They're almost invisible. They don't trigger the same resistance. And because they're easy to repeat, they become habits. Imagine improving by just 1% every single day. 1% sounds insignificant. In fact, it's so small that most people ignore it completely. They want immediate results. They want visible progress. They want proof that their efforts are working. But the 1% rule teaches something different. Small improvements don't look impressive today. They become impressive because they never stop. Think about planting a seed. The day after you plant it, nothing seems to happen. A week later, almost nothing changes. Even after several weeks, the growth appears slow. If you judge the process too early, you might believe nothing was happening at all. But beneath the surface, roots are growing. Strength is developing. The foundation is being built. Then one day, the growth becomes impossible to ignore. Success works the same way. Most progress happens long before anyone can see it. That's why so many people quit too early. They're standing just inches away from visible progress, but because they can't see immediate results, they assume nothing is changing. The truth is that consistency is often invisible before it becomes obvious. Highly successful people understand this. They don't ask themselves, how can I completely change my life today? Instead, they ask a much simpler question. What can I improve by 1%? Maybe it's reading one extra page. Maybe it's walking for 10 minutes. Maybe it's waking up 15 minutes earlier. Maybe it's replacing one unhealthy meal. Maybe it's saving $5 instead of spending it. None of these actions seem life-changing, but that's exactly why they work. They're small enough to repeat, and repetition is where real transformation begins. There's another reason why the 1% rule is so powerful. Every small improvement changes your identity. Imagine someone who has never exercised before. Going to the gym for 3 hours probably won't change who they believe they are. But exercising for 15 minutes every day slowly creates evidence. It tells the brain, I am someone who takes care of my body. Someone who reads one page every night begins collecting evidence. I am someone who learns every day. Someone who saves a little money every week begins believing, I am someone who manages money wisely. Identity isn't created by one big achievement. It's created by repeated actions. Every small habit becomes a vote for the person you're becoming. The opposite is also true. Small negative habits also grow. Skipping one workout doesn't seem important. Eating unhealthy once doesn't seem dangerous. Wasting one evening scrolling through social media doesn't feel like a problem. But repeated often enough, small negative decisions quietly shape your future. Success and failure are rarely dramatic. They're usually gradual. Imagine two airplanes leaving the same airport. One changes its direction by only a few degrees. At first, the difference is almost impossible to notice. But after several thousand miles, those airplanes arrive in completely different countries. Tiny changes in direction create enormous differences over time. Your daily habits work exactly the same way. One extra hour spent learning every week, one unnecessary purchase avoided, one more healthy decision, one more difficult conversation, one more promise kept to yourself. These tiny adjustments slowly change your destination. Unfortunately, many people underestimate the power of time. They judge today's effort by today's results. When nothing dramatic happens immediately, they become discouraged. But compound growth doesn't reward impatience. It rewards persistence. Money compounds, knowledge compounds, skills compound, relationships compound, confidence compounds, discipline compounds. The person you become 5 years from now is largely determined by the habits you repeat today. Not because today's habits are extraordinary, but because time multiplies everything. This is why successful people rarely chase quick wins. They're thinking years ahead. They understand that every small improvement becomes easier after it's repeated enough times. Eventually, what once required discipline becomes automatic. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't negotiate with yourself every morning. You don't ask whether you feel motivated. You simply do it. Habits remove the need for constant decision-making. The goal isn't to rely on motivation forever. The goal is to make positive actions automatic. Another lesson hidden inside the 1% rule is patience. Modern culture rewards instant gratification. Everyone wants immediate success, immediate wealth, immediate transformation. But meaningful progress almost always takes longer than people expect. This creates something psychologists often call the valley of disappointment. It's the period where you're working consistently, but seeing very little visible progress. This is where most people quit, not because their strategy is wrong, but because they mistake slow progress for no progress. The people who eventually succeed are often the ones who simply stay long enough to see the results appear. Every day they continue showing up, even when nothing exciting happens, even when nobody notices, even when progress feels invisible, because they understand that today's effort is creating tomorrow's opportunities. The 1% rule also changes how you respond to failure. Many people believe one mistake ruins everything. They miss one workout and give up. They break one good habit and assume they've failed. But small improvements work both ways. One mistake won't destroy your future, just as one good decision won't instantly transform it. What matters most is returning to the path quickly. Imagine climbing a staircase. If you slip on one step, you don't start over from the bottom. You simply regain your balance and continue climbing. Life works the same way. Consistency doesn't require perfection, it requires persistence. Perhaps the greatest advantage of focusing on 1% improvements is that it removes overwhelm. Instead of worrying about changing your entire life, you only need to improve today's version of yourself. That's manageable. That's realistic. That's sustainable. You don't need to become the best. You only need to become slightly better than yesterday, every single day. Eventually, those small improvements create something remarkable. People begin calling you disciplined, successful, lucky. They admire your results. What they don't see are the hundreds of ordinary days that created those extraordinary outcomes. They don't see the mornings you kept showing up, the books you finished, the walks you took, the distractions you resisted, the promises you kept. Extraordinary lives are usually built through ordinary days, day after day, week after week, year after year. The 1% rule isn't exciting. It doesn't promise overnight success. It doesn't guarantee instant results. But it offers something much more valuable, a process that actually lasts. So instead of asking yourself how to completely transform your life this week, ask yourself a different question. What's one small improvement you can make today? One page, one push-up, $1 saved, one healthy meal, one difficult task completed, one kind conversation, one promise kept. Don't underestimate how powerful those tiny actions can become. Because every great achievement was once a collection of small decisions. Every successful person was once a beginner. Every extraordinary life was once built through ordinary habits. And 1 year from now, you may look back and realize that your future didn't change because of one huge moment. It changed because you became just 1% better. Again, and again, and again. Until one day, the person you dreamed of becoming quietly became the person you are. Because the smallest improvements, repeated consistently, often create the biggest transformations. And that's how the 1% rule changes a future forever.